She thought she had found the love of her life, a man who will complement her. Then, a trembling voice broke through the 911 line and said, "Please, my mom is bleeding." By the time officers arrived, the scene inside the house would scare the entire neighborhood. A mother bleeding badly, and her 2 children, caught in the middle of something they can't explain. But what really happened here and why? How did a home filled with laughter just hours before turn into a scene of horror? And why did the man who should be there to protect become the one who brought chaos? To understand how and why this chaos took place, we will take a look at where it all started from. Before we continue, this is the Crime Catalog. Stay tuned, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Before the police lights and the whispers of betrayal, there was simply Melissa. Born in 1990, raised in Charlotte, she carried herself with a kind of quiet strength that drew people in without trying. Friends would say she was the one who held everyone together, the protector in their circle, the woman who, no matter how heavy her own burdens, found a way to shoulder someone else's. Life wasn't easy. She worked long hours, sometimes juggling 2 jobs, coming home exhausted but never too tired to sit at the kitchen table helping her kids with homework, or to stay up baking a cake for a birthday she couldn't afford to cater. Pictures from those years capture her perfectly. The smile that always seemed a little bigger than her struggles, the laughter that echoed louder than her worries. Melissa was more than a mother. She was a dreamer, a woman who wanted more for her children than the life she had known. And slowly, she was building it, step by step, paycheck by paycheck, with a determination that only grew stronger when the world tried to wear her down. But even the strongest hearts carry quiet longings. Behind her smile was a hope for something she hadn't yet found. Love. The kind of love that wouldn't just ease the load, but make her feel seen, protected, cherished. It was the missing piece in the life she worked so hard to hold together. And when she finally thought she found it, that's when the story changed. Because the love Melissa welcomed into her life, the love she believed would complete her, would become the very thing that unraveled everything. Darius Coleman was born in the summer of 1988, in the working-class neighborhoods of Detroit. To some, he was the boy who always had a mischievous grin, the one who could charm his way out of almost any situation. But to others, he was a storm waiting to break. His teenage years were a trail of warnings, petty thefts, street fights, and a short stint in juvenile detention. Each incident, though minor on its own, hinted at an undercurrent of restlessness, a young man searching for control in a world that rarely handed him any. By his 20s, Darius carried himself like a man constantly at war with something invisible. Friends recalled how he could light up a room with jokes, only to turn cold and brooding moments later. He had a way of pulling people close, then reminding them, often with a sharp word or sudden silence, that they could be pushed away just as quickly. In 2015, Melissa encountered him for the first time. She was working an evening shift at the clinic, tired but smiling as she checked patients in. Darius had come to accompany a cousin with a minor injury. He leaned casually against the counter, spinning a pen between his fingers, and struck up a conversation with her. He wasn't shy. If anything, his confidence felt oversized. But Melissa, weary from long hours, found herself laughing at his quick wit. Their romance sparked quickly. Darius sent flowers to her workplace within the week. He showed up outside her job unannounced, insisting he just couldn't wait to see her. At first, Melissa found the attention flattering. Friends teased her about her mystery man, the one who seemed to worship the ground she walked on. But the charm didn't take long to reveal its edge. Co-workers remembered how his calls became constant, sometimes buzzing through during her shift, one after another, until she had to step outside. He didn't just ask where she was, he demanded proof. Once, Melissa answered on speakerphone, laughing nervously as she said, "See, I'm really here, Darius." Her friends exchanged uneasy looks, but Melissa brushed it off as the quirks of a passionate boyfriend. This wasn't passion, though. It was possession, carefully disguised. And while Melissa thought she had found a man who simply cared too much, Those closest to her began to see something else, a darkness tightening its grip. To Melissa, Darius's intensity felt like love. But love doesn't follow you like a shadow. Love doesn't demand proof. What she believed was devotion was the first whisper of obsession. The year was 2017, and for Melissa, Charlotte promised renewal. A bigger city, a brighter skyline, more opportunities for her kids and herself. She told friends back home in Charlotte that she was chasing a fresh start, a chance to leave behind the struggles of being a single mom scraping through 2 jobs. But for Darius, this move wasn't about opportunity, it was about control. Charlotte stripped Melissa of her support system. Her mother, her cousins, her closest friends, all left behind in the familiar folds of their hometown. What she didn't realize was that this relocation gave Darius everything he needed: distance, privacy, and dominance. In Charlotte, she wouldn't have someone to run to after a fight, or a best friend to show up at her door with wine when things got rough. Here, she was tethered almost entirely to him. The first weeks were promising. Melissa found work at a logistics office. Darius seemed attentive, supportive, even proud of her resilience. Their new apartment was modest but neat, the kind of space Melissa thought she could slowly transform into a home. There were family dinners on the floor before the furniture arrived, little moments of laughter that convinced her she had made the right choice. But beneath that veneer, cracks were already forming. Friends back home noticed it first. Melissa's phone calls grew shorter. She stopped posting pictures as frequently. Where there once were updates filled with joy, birthday cakes, park visits, silly selfies, there was now silence. "She's just busy," she told them when they asked. But in truth, her world was shrinking, confined within the 4 walls of the apartment she shared with a man who insisted on being the center of her universe. The tension became visible in the smallest of ways. One night at dinner, Melissa's phone buzzed on the table. It was a harmless text from a coworker about a shift change. Melissa chuckled softly at the typo in the message, but that laughter never reached Darius. His jaw tightened. He put down his fork, his eyes darkening with something she couldn't quite name. He didn't argue, didn't say a word. Instead, he rose from the table, leaving his plate untouched. That silence, heavy and cutting, spoke louder than any confrontation. Moments like this repeated. A smile at the wrong time. A phone call taken in another room. A co-worker's name mentioned too often. To Melissa, these seemed like misunderstandings, quirks of a man who maybe just loved too deeply. But in reality, they were the earliest signals of isolation, control, and looming danger. And yet, no one on the outside could see the storm brewing. Charlotte police records from this period show no complaints, no reports, no official evidence that Melissa was trapped in a relationship edging toward toxicity. On paper, she was just another young woman chasing stability in a growing city. But her absence from her old life told a different story. Her friends noticed she stopped making the 3-hour drives back home on weekends. Family dinners she once cherished were replaced with excuses about work, money, or the kids' schedules. But the truth was simple. Leaving town even for a night meant inviting an argument, and arguments with Darius were never worth the cost. So Melissa stayed quiet, stayed put, stayed small. If you knew moving away meant being alone with someone whose love felt more like a cage, would you still take that risk? By 2019, Melissa's bright spirit had dulled. She was no longer the woman who laughed freely in break rooms or who FaceTimed family late into the night. For the first time, she confided in a close friend back home. The words were whispered, hesitant. "Sometimes he scares me. Not always. Just sometimes." That confession marked the first crack in the facade she had been holding together for years. CCTV footage shows Melissa standing barefoot outside the couple's apartment building. The night was damp, and the concrete biting cold against her feet. She's wearing nothing but a thin nightgown. Goosebumps rise on her arms as she wraps them tightly around her body. Behind her, the door is firmly locked. Darius had pushed her out in the middle of an argument, then closed the door without a word. Neighbors peek through blinds, then quickly retreat, unwilling to get involved. The silence is deafening. For Melissa, every second outside felt like an hour. Shame burned hotter than the cold night air. When Darius finally reopened the door, his face was calm, disturbingly calm. He acted as though nothing had happened. No yelling, no apology, just quiet. That silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. Abusers often understand that humiliation in isolation is more devastating than physical aggression. By making Melissa feel invisible, exposed, and powerless, Darius reinforced his dominance without leaving bruises. This is the cycle: control, humiliation, then a false calm. It keeps the victim trapped, always chasing the man he pretends to be in those moments of calm. Melissa wasn't just living with anger. She was living with uncertainty. And uncertainty, as experts stress, is one of the most powerful tools of control. Melissa's choice to remain wasn't weakness. It was layered with love, fear, and responsibility. She stayed for her children, believing they needed stability more than anything. She stayed because she clung to the hope that the man she once fell in love with was still in there, buried beneath the shadows. And she stayed because leaving wasn't simple. It meant starting over alone, with no family nearby, and the terrifying risk of provoking Darius's wrath. Friends noticed her absence. Calls went unanswered. Social media posts stopped. Melissa's world had shrunk to the size of her apartment, her work, and Darius's moods. By 2020, fear wasn't just a visitor in Melissa's life. It had moved in permanently. She thought the worst had already happened. But when Melissa tried to escape, Darius's rage didn't fade. It only evolved. He found new, darker ways to reach her. By late 2020, the fragile illusion of calm in Melissa's household had already begun to splinter. The first unmistakable sign that things had shifted into something darker came in October. It was a quiet evening in their Charlotte neighborhood when neighbors reported a sudden burst of flames slicing through the night sky. Melissa's Nissan Altima, her lifeline to work, to her children's school, to freedom, was engulfed in fire in the driveway. Witnesses recall her running barefoot onto the lawn, screaming, while Darius stood just feet away, his expression unreadable, almost cold. Fire investigators deemed the blaze suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence to tie it to anyone. For Melissa, though, the message was clear. The destruction wasn't random. This was a warning, a declaration that her independence would be punished. 6 months later, in April 2021, the cruelty escalated in a way that broke Melissa's spirit more deeply than the fire ever could. Their family dog, a small terrier that Melissa's kids adored, was found convulsing in the backyard. The vet later confirmed the dog had ingested poison. Melissa's children cried for days, unable to understand why their beloved pet was gone. Though Melissa never voiced it publicly, she told a close confidant that she knew in her heart this wasn't an accident. The dog had represented comfort, loyalty, and safety. Killing it stripped away yet another layer of her support. Police suspicions circled back to Darius, but once again there was no hard evidence, no eyewitness, no physical proof. As one officer later admitted in a confidential report, "We had our suspicions, but suspicion doesn't win in court." That line would haunt Melissa because it captured her reality perfectly. She was trapped between fear and proof, between the terror she lived and the impossibility of convincing the system to protect her. By mid-2021, Melissa finally did what so many victims of abuse hesitate to do. She filed for a protective order. Legal experts in the documentary explain what that meant. In theory, the order barred Darius from contacting her or coming near her home. In reality, these orders often act more as a suggestion than an impenetrable barrier. A protective order is only as strong as the abuser's respect for the law, one attorney notes. And in cases like Darius's, the abuser doesn't see the law as an obstacle. He sees it as a challenge. Melissa would learn that truth firsthand. The phone calls started almost immediately after the order was served. Sometimes it was silence on the other end, the heavy breathing unmistakable. Other times it was Darius's voice, low, venomous, threaded with a kind of familiarity that made it impossible to ignore. "You know you can't keep me away," he would murmur. "I'll always be close." These weren't shouted threats. They were whispers of inevitability, which somehow felt worse. He knew exactly how to plant fear without leaving evidence that could be used against him. The weight of that fear began to change Melissa's daily life. Friends recall she rarely slept through the night. Instead, she kept her phone tucked under her pillow, screen dimmed, ready to call for help at the first sound of a creak or shadow moving outside her window. She double-checked the locks before bed, then woke at 3 a.m. to check them again. Her children remember the way she startled at sudden noises, the slamming of a door, the ringing of a phone. She wasn't just living under Darius's control anymore. She was anticipating it, reshaping her entire existence around the possibility of his next move. Psychologists interviewed for the documentary explain how abusers escalate once their partner attempts to leave. The destruction of property, the killing of pets, the silent phone calls, they are all designed to erode resistance and reassert dominance. He was making it clear, one expert explains, that the law couldn't shield her, the police couldn't protect her, and her own attempts at freedom would be punished. Melissa's protective order should have been her shield, but instead, it became a piece of paper that mocked her every night as she lay awake, listening for footsteps. Her hope had been that the law would give her a safe distance. Instead, it revealed just how close Darius could remain, even when he wasn't supposed to be there. Do you believe protective orders are enough to safeguard victims of domestic abuse, or are they simply a false sense of security? Share your thoughts below. By the summer of 2021, Melissa was determined to carve out a new life for herself and her children. She had finally signed the lease on a modest 3-bedroom home on the quiet edge of town. It wasn't much, but to her, it was freedom. The moving day was filled with laughter and cardboard boxes, her kids racing through the empty hallways and claiming bedrooms as though they were choosing thrones. For the first time in years, Melissa breathed easily. She snapped a picture of her children grinning in front of their new home and posted it online with the words, "Fresh start. My kids deserve peace." That post was simple, but for Melissa, it was a declaration of independence. A bold statement that she had survived the storm and was ready to build again. Her new job at a healthcare administration office added to her confidence. Every morning she arrived neatly dressed, her smile growing brighter by the day. Colleagues remember her transformation vividly. She was glowing again, like she had stepped out from under a shadow, one co-worker recalled. There was a lightness in her step, a cautious optimism in her voice, and even moments of laughter that seemed to surprise her as much as those around her. For a while, it seemed like Melissa had outrun the ghost of her past. But Darius was never far behind. It started with small sightings. Melissa would spot him parked in his Nissan at the edge of the parking lot outside her workplace. He never confronted her, never caused a scene. Instead, he simply watched. His presence was suffocating precisely because it was silent. She confided to her sister in a hushed phone call late one evening. "He's watching me. I know something bad is coming." Her voice carried the unmistakable tone of a woman who no longer doubted the danger, only when it would strike. Friends noticed her growing unease. She no longer lingered at the office after hours. She stopped taking late evening walks with her children. Even inside her own home, Melissa grew hyper-aware of shadows outside the windows, noises in the night, and the ever-present thought that she was being followed. The protective order she once hoped would shield her now felt like little more than a fragile piece of paper against a man whose obsession was burning hotter by the day. For Melissa, every sunrise was both a relief and a warning. Each day she survived was proof of her resilience, but also another day closer to the inevitable. In her journal, later discovered by investigators, she scribbled a haunting line. "The countdown has begun. I can feel it." And she was right. The days were numbered. Danger loomed closer with each passing heartbeat, bringing with it a reckoning that Melissa had sensed all along but couldn't escape. July 18, 2021, was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday in Melissa's new home. Church clothes folded neatly on the bed, the smell of dinner leftovers still lingering in the kitchen, children laughing in the living room. But beneath that quiet domesticity, an unease had already settled. Melissa had confided to her sister days earlier, "I don't think I'll make it through July. He's circling me like a wolf." Those words would replay in haunting echoes long after her death. The reconstructed timeline begins just after 7 p.m. Neighbors reported the sound of raised voices outside Melissa's home. Surveillance cameras from across the street captured a shadowy figure, Darius, pacing near his car, his body language agitated, his arms flailing as though in an argument no one else could hear. 4 minutes, he loitered there, slipping between moments of stillness and sudden bursts of movement. Then, in chilling clarity, the footage showed him walking to his trunk, opening it, and pulling out a weapon that seemed grotesquely out of place in a suburban cul-de-sac. An axe. Inside the house, Melissa's children were the first to sense danger. Her 9-year-old son would later describe the sound of glass shattering, his mother's screams slicing through the silence, and the thunder of footsteps rushing down the hallway. Terrified by the sight of the pool of blood where his mother was laying helpless, he did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The call, later released in court, is gut-wrenching. His small voice, trembling and broken by sobs, cries out, "Please, my mother is bleeding. Please hurry." The dispatcher's calm voice tried to steady him, but the boy's words dissolved into screams as the horror unfolded in real time. By the time officers arrived, body cameras rolling, the scene inside was catastrophic. Melissa lay motionless on the living room floor, blood pooling around her body. The axe, slick and crimson, rested beside her like the final punctuation mark in Darius's violent obsession. The children's cries echoed through the house, the youngest discovered in a closet, knees to chest, whispering, "Is Mommy okay?" One officer's voice cracked on camera as he gently pulled the child into his arms. The forensic details that emerged painted a picture almost too brutal to comprehend. Melissa had suffered multiple blows, each more savage than the last, leaving investigators to conclude this wasn't a crime of sudden rage, but one of absolute intent. Crime scene photographs, blurred for the public, still carried the unbearable weight of what had transpired. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, the walls splattered with evidence of a life stolen in sheer brutality. And then came the most chilling detail of all. When police searched the neighborhood, Darius was gone. He had slipped into the night like a ghost, abandoning his children in the chaos he created. Patrol cars combed the streets, helicopters scanned the area, and roadblocks were set up, but it was as if the ground had swallowed him whole. As investigators pieced together Melissa's final moments, one pressing question loomed larger than all others. Where did Darius go? And how long could a man capable of such cruelty remain free? The hours after Melissa's murder were marked by chaos, grief, and fear. Police sealed off the neighborhood as crime scene tape fluttered in the humid July air. Patrol cars and forensic vans lined the street, their flashing lights illuminating the shocked faces of neighbors who had gathered outside. Parents held their children tightly. Some whispered prayers. Others shook their heads in disbelief, murmuring, "How could this happen here?" The news spread rapidly through social media, and within hours, Melissa's smiling, fresh start posts were being reshared alongside captions filled with heartbreak and outrage. Meanwhile, Darius was nowhere to be found. The manhunt began immediately. Local police coordinated with the U.S. Marshal Service, setting up roadblocks, tracing his last known cell phone pings, and interviewing anyone who had spoken to him in recent days. Authorities warned the community to stay inside and lock their doors. Helicopters buzzed overhead at night, their spotlights cutting through the darkness as officers combed wooded areas near Melissa's home. Schools and businesses in the immediate area were put on soft lockdown. Residents described an atmosphere of dread, as if danger lurked just outside their doors. The interviews with neighbors captured the raw terror of those nights. One woman, clutching her rosary beads, recalled hearing the children's screams that night and admitted she hadn't slept since. Another neighbor confessed he kept a baseball bat by his bedside, afraid Darius might circle back. "We weren't just scared for ourselves," he said. "We were scared for the kids. We knew he was desperate, and desperate men don't think straight." 2 days into the search, a critical tip came through. A distant cousin of Darius, living in Greenville, South Carolina, called authorities after realizing her relative had been hiding out in her apartment. She'd grown suspicious when he refused to turn on the lights, whispered on his phone, and came in reeking of sweat and gasoline. She noticed scratches across his arms and face, as if he'd fought through brush while fleeing. When she caught sight of his shoes, still stained dark red, she knew exactly what he had done. U.S. Marshals moved in swiftly. At dawn, they surrounded the modest apartment complex. Body-worn camera footage later revealed the moment. Officers stacking against the door, battering it open and rushing inside. They found Darius sitting on the edge of a couch, hands trembling, head bowed as if waiting for the inevitable. He didn't run, didn't fight. His silence was eerie, broken only by the sharp click of handcuffs closing around his wrists. The arrest footage was broadcast nationally, but producers left it with a deliberate, chilling silence. No narration, no music, just the heavy sound of Darius's breathing, the shuffle of boots on linoleum, and the stark image of him being led out in chains, his eyes fixed on the ground. The stain of Melissa's blood still clung to his shoes, a haunting reminder of the brutality he had unleashed only 48 hours earlier. Do you think killers like Darius feel remorse, or only fear of being caught? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In April 2022, Darius was brought to court. The courtroom in downtown Detroit was packed beyond capacity. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens scratching against notepads. Melissa's family sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery, their faces set in grief and quiet rage. The air was heavy, like everyone in the room was holding their breath. At the center of it all sat Darius Miller, expressionless, shoulders squared, eyes darting only when the jury entered. The trial became a duel of narratives. The prosecution painted Darius as a man consumed by jealousy, a man who stalked Melissa, waited for her to be alone, and unleashed unspeakable violence. They spoke of her final hours in haunting detail, leaving jurors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The defense countered with desperation. They claimed Darius had suffered a mental break, that he wasn't in control of his actions. They suggested he had been intoxicated, spiraling, not fully aware. But the prosecutor's rebuttal was swift and merciless. Losing control does not excuse premeditation. Melissa opened that door to help someone she trusted. He used that trust to kill her. Testimony after testimony cemented the truth. Neighbors recalled hearing muffled screams. Detectives laid out damning evidence. Phone records, his car caught on a traffic camera near Melissa Street, DNA that erased all doubt. Then came the moment that silenced the room. Melissa's sister, trembling as she held back tears, faced Darius directly. She was more than a victim, she said, her voice breaking. She was a mother. She had 2 little ones who waited by the door for her every night. And because of you, Darius, they wait for someone who will never come home. Gasps echoed. Some jurors blinked hard, swallowing emotion. Darius lowered his gaze but never cried. When the case was finally handed to the jury, tension gripped the courtroom. Hours passed like days. Then, just after 3 hours, the jury filed back in. Every eye locked on the foreperson, whose hands trembled as she unfolded the slip of paper. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Darius Miller, guilty. The words cut through the silence. Melissa's family wept openly. A sigh of relief, mixed with pain, swept the room. Darius showed no reaction, as if the verdict belonged to someone else. The judge's voice was steady, final. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, at least on paper, had been delivered. But as Melissa's children were quietly led out of the courtroom, clutching the hands of relatives, a painful truth lingered in the air. The system had punished the man who took her life, but it could never restore the life that was lost. And the question remained, had justice truly come, or had it arrived far too late? The trial had ended, the courtroom was cleared, and the cameras shifted away from the face of the man who had destroyed so many lives. But Melissa Andrews' story didn't end with a verdict. It lived on through the people who loved her, the children she left behind, and the community forever scarred by her murder. Melissa was more than a victim. Friends and family remember her as vibrant, determined, and deeply protective of her children. Old family footage shows her laughing in the kitchen, her arms around her youngest as they tried to bake cookies, her eldest balancing on her lap while she read bedtime stories. Her sister recalls through tears, "She fought so hard to build a better life. She wanted her kids safe. She wanted freedom. And she deserved to live long enough to see that dream come true." Her 3 children, who once lived under the shadow of fear, are now being raised by Melissa's sister. Their lives are forever divided into 2 parts, before and after July 18, 2021. Every birthday, every holiday, every school milestone is marked by her absence. Melissa's story also reignited broader conversations about domestic violence. Advocacy leaders and social workers appear on screen, voices steady but urgent. They remind viewers that Melissa had sought help, had tried to escape, and that her cries were drowned out by systems too slow and too overwhelmed to protect her in time. "When victims say they're afraid, we must listen the first time," one advocate stresses. "Because when we don't, tragedies like Melissa's happen." Melissa Andrews' story forces us to confront a painful truth. How many more cries for help must be ignored before another life is lost? How many more children must grow up without a mother or a father because warnings were overlooked? Melissa's case is not just about one family. It's about all of us, and the choices we make to either turn away or to act. If you or someone you loved were in Melissa's situation, what would you do differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe your voice could be the one that helps save a life. This has been the Crime Catalogue. If you made it this far, thank you for riding with us, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to hear the stories that must be told. And most importantly, share this video.